In today's video, it will be revealed how Russia appears to have managed to evade American sanctions by capturing some of Brazil's market share and avoiding the European Union with the aid of Iraq. Despite additional restrictions on Moscow's energy supplies, Russian diesel exports experienced their highest volume month on record in March, according to a significant player. The United States, Europe, and other Western nations have imposed a variety of sanctions on Russia since Vladimir Putin began his war in Ukraine. After prohibiting imports of seaborne crude oil in December, the European Union banned imports of refined Russian fuels, including diesel, in February. Despite this, Russia's oil and diesel export volumes are still high, despite steep discounts. Thanks to China and India, crude oil shipments have actually risen above pre-war levels, and according to Kepler data, Russian diesel exports reached a record 1.27 million barrels per day in March. However, Russian diesel exports have experienced the opposite of what has happened with crude exports, which have largely consolidated into a small number of significant buyers. Trade flows for diesel have sparked up into many North African countries, while other key exporters like Turkey and Saudi Arabia have increasingly imported Russian diesel in recent months, given favorable pricing, according to Copper lead oil analyst Matt Smith. He claimed that several countries like China and India had increased their imports of Russian goods simply to resell them. Overall, established suppliers are being replaced by Russian diesel as trade flows change to compensate for the decline in exports to the European market. He continued, "It's a musical chairs game, and one we've already seen play out with other Russian products like fuel oil." The analyst stated that Brazil, for instance, imported practically no Russian diesel up until the end of 2022, with the majority of its supplies coming from the United States and other sellers, according to Kepler data. In December 2022, the United States sent about 150,000 barrels per day of diesel to Brazil, but that number dropped by about 50% in April. In contrast, Brazil's imports of diesel from Russia, on the other hand, spiked to almost 100,000 barrels per day this month. Despite the when Russia is unable to sell its diesel to anyone else, it might be assumed that Brazil is the last resort, but the volumes delivered over the past 3 months indicate something more consistent and more of a trend. Russian diesel appears to be aggressively capturing American market share in Brazil. Russia's crude oil is lost to Europe. The loss of similar supplies from northern Iraq and a shocking reduction in output by some of the world's top producer nations flowing from Russia have put additional strain on Europe's oil refiners, who are already struggling to survive without long-standing shipments of Russian crude. Prior to the country's invasion of Ukraine in February of last year, the European Union's leading supply had fallen by more than 1 million barrels per day despite tighter sanctions. Due to Iraq's suspension of exports that go through a Turkish port in the Mediterranean Sea to reach Europe, those reductions are now beginning to hurt more severely. The production of OPEC+ producers, including Russia, has been announced to be reduced by about 1.6 million barrels per day by July for Europe. The loss occurs at a regrettable time. Similar in density and sulfur quality are the Russian and Iraqi grades, and refiners in Asia, particularly China, are increasing demand for this so-called medium sour oil, which is a staple in their diet. Asia may outbid Europe for barrels in fierce competition, which could lead to European run cuts to balance the crude market. Russian flows to Europe significantly declined during March. The EU imports 95,000 barrels of Russian wine daily. All cargoes were shipped to Bulgaria, which is exempt from EU sanctions on imports of seaborne crude from Russia, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. Origin euros compared with almost 1.2 million barrels daily in February last year, according to Energy Considerations. Since the spring of 2022, Europe has substituted Middle Eastern oil for at least a quarter of its Russian import. The International Energy Agency stated in its monthly report earlier this month that flows from the Atlantic Basin from Norway and Angola to the United States also increased in the first 3 months of this year. However, there is a new wrinkle from the Middle East. Since last month, about 450,000 barrels per day of crude supplies from Iraq's Kurdish region have been halted due to a payment dispute in March, and at least 166,000 daily barrels of this oil have been produced. Given the loss of Kurdish grades, some traders claim that the move indicated the limited supply of such barrels on the spot market. Russia's oil shadow fleet. Concerns about the shadow fleet of oil tankers that have emerged to transport oil amid sanctions were expressed by a United Nations agency that oversees shipping, and they called for more safety measures. The International Maritime Organization's legal committee recommends that more inspections be conducted in states that become aware of ships that go dark or turn off their transponders. Ship-to-ship oil transfers on the open sea were also criticized by the panel, which claimed that they increase the risk of pollution for coastal states. Several nations, including Spain, Australia, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and subsequent sanctions by Western governments disrupted shipping routes for the most traded commodity in the world. The United States and Canada are part of an effort at the IMF to increase oversight of the murky activities in oil trading that have emerged within the past year. At the IMO's assembly meeting later this year, Spain, which has noticed an increase in activity off its North African outpost of Suta, said it intends to demand stricter regulations governing oil transfers from ship to ship. The matter is particularly sensitive for the nation because it was the site of one of the largest oil spills in European history when the Prestige tanker split in half off the coast of the nation, spilling almost all of its cargo of heavy fuel oil. A shadow fleet of hundreds of outdated ships has arisen to enable the trade, even though more Russian crude has been flowing to Asia in the past year. The Prestige tankers in the dark fleet pose a real and high risk of incident, particularly when engaged in ship-to-ship transfers as they disguise the cargo's destinations or origins or avoided oversight or regulation by flag or coastal states. The committee mentioned a 26-year-old tanker called the Turba, which Bloomberg reported Sunday had collected the same cargo of heavy fuel from the same Russian port. According to the panel, the Russian delegation to the IMO urged governments to stop abusing sanctions and to stop limiting the actions of other states while appreciating the advantages of further oversight. Russia told the committee that its present worries are a result of unjustified sanctions. Russian crude continues to flow into India and China on a massive shadow fleet of tankers believed to have been built up before the price cap implementation trend. The European price cap that went into effect in December 2022 has not helped Russian crude flow to Europe. Urals crude oil grade was historically distributed into Europe through a vast network of transcontinental pipeline networks and through ports in the Baltic and Black Sea. Due to their geographical proximity, most of the Russian barrels used to find home in European refiners. Therefore, the price of the grade was assessed at Rotterdam and represented the value that primarily European refiners saw in the grade since that trade has been replaced by a novel flow. Widespread market speculation regarding the prices Indian refiners have been paying for the distress grade shipment in small-sized Aframax vessels, along with challenges in securing insurance, securing ships, financing, and payment-related issues, resulted in a difference between the landed price of these barrels to Indian refiners and the CIF Rotterdam price for Urals crude that is quite apparent. Numerous regulators, governmental organizations, and non-governmental organizations from all over the world keep a close eye on this market to assess the effectiveness of efforts to reduce oil revenues. The crude oil trading community has been closely monitoring this flow as well, since the deeper discounted Russian barrels have consistently presented fierce competition to barrels from the Middle East, West Africa, and the Atlantic Basin. For example, in 2022, the price of some important Nigerian grades that Indian refiners preferred decreased slightly as a result of the refiners' reliance on Urals crude to meet demand. Instead, Russian oil flows to India are only a year old, but at 1.5 million BPD, they already account for more than 30% of the country's imports of crude oil. The geopolitical situation in Europe, where the negative sentiment towards consuming Russian energy is expected to remain for now, makes the massive inflows seem unlikely to dissipate anytime soon. The flow of Russian oil into India has largely continued to be delivered at port DAP terms because domestic refineries appear to be unable to handle the unconventional logistics of Urals into India, but economic incentives in the form of discounts are sufficient to maintain interest in those cargoes for the foreseeable future. Since the launch, there has been significant interest in the independently assessed value of Russian crude oil being delivered into the South Asian nation of India. This is because analysts, government refiners, traders, sellers, and buyers have begun to fairly understand the price of one of the most talked about oil flows in the world. Several market participants have been closely monitoring the price, which is used as a crucial point of reference when trading volumes of Russian crude oil, particularly when the same is done through unconventional supply sources. The flow of this oil and its economics will continue to be a fundamental concern in the expanding Indian refining industry, which makes India a significant contributor to the rise in global oil demand. By 2025, India's refining capacity is anticipated to increase from 5.25 million BPD to 5.9 million BPD as petroleum consumption grows at a 4.50% annual rate. Assessments not only signal an important reference point for the wider market, which is affected directly or indirectly by this trade flow realignment, but also provide some clarity to the imprecise post-invasion world of Russian oil flows. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video and for sharing your thoughts on the sanctions on Russian oil. We're always looking for ways to improve our content and bring you the best information possible. So if you have any suggestions or feedback, please feel free to leave them in the comments section below. Your input helps us to grow and deliver better content to you. Your engagement is what makes this community of business investors and financial learners so valuable and engaging. If you found this video helpful or informative, we have more content waiting for you on our channel. Click on the screen to check out our other videos and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more such videos in the upcoming days.